Jared holding on the phone, but we're good to go. I'm sorry I lost you.
No, it's all good. As long as you can hear me clearly.
I can. We're ready to go. I'm
Perfect.
moving.
Well, I guess we'll just recalibrate right here. So the record itself, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, what does that number 50 mean to you in context of not only the music, but also the legacy of that album?
You mean number 50 as a 50-year anniversary?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it was such a departure at the time, and as both Roger and I relate this sort of story on stage, we were really rebuilding the band, if not spinning our wheels and trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And we had done this album, Notorious Byrd Brothers, which we ended up, the two of us, finishing the record, because we were guys flying at that point. But there was a couple of country things on that. It was Old John Robertson and Wasn't Born to Follow and stuff like this. And as I say in the show, we started messing around with that back in the second album in '65 when we did Satisfied Mind, which was a Porter Wagner hit.
Yep.
So it wasn't like all of a sudden, they decided to go to Nashville and do this. Well, yeah, we did decide to go to Nashville. We discussed it. Of course, we hired Graham on as a side guy to play in the band, and he was very taken with country at that point. Now, you got to remember, Graham was funny. He had started out as a folk singer, pretty much like Roger and I and Gene and David. So it wasn't a big stretch for any of us. But Graham had a real love for the music, and he was ready to go. So off we went. What we were talking about earlier was, what does it mean now? We're performing them songs better. We have Marty and his band, which are fantastic. That was the last conversation I think we were in. And they know the music, and we're all having such a good time. It's a shame it has to end in December.
What was it like at that at the Ryman show? Because I've actually heard a few people talk about how special that night was.
It was pretty good. I mean, I can imagine it was pressure for Marty being a resident of Nashville or the area around Nashville, and the other guys. But we just had a great time. We did a good show. It hasn't really ever fallen below a certain level of performance.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier, they're all great singers and incredible players, and it's a quartet. It blows me away. And people go on about this band or that band, and I go, man, I tell you what, having worked with these guys for a few months, they can tackle anything. And I watched them play one night. We had an off night, and Marty had a show with Chris Stapleton. So I got to watch Marty play he did a 30, 40-minute set. They actually did a surf instrumental. And I look at my wife, I go, oh my God, listen to this guy's sound, like the Ventures. And they're having a great time. They love to play music, and the last person I was working with that had that same feeling was Tom Petty, when he just loved music, all kinds of music, and that was a joy in my life, doing an album with Tom. And then along comes this tour.
Well, I think it's a two-way street, because that's not only a big part of what the Byrds were about, which was kind of like go where you feel, but then at the same time, the people that have always championed your band were also in that same vein.
Yeah, and we never wanted to stay boxed in, but we never left the parameters of our sound. The Byrds sound, be it on a country song or 8 Miles High, was still the Byrds sound. And that's what was wonderful about the band. And I was a lucky guy, Garrett, to be in that band. I got to tell you, I will say it to anybody. It was a good band, and we had our issues and problems like everybody else, but the most of our work was top notch.
How big was country music to you growing up?
It was pretty big. My parents didn't like it. They liked big band music and standards and Sinatra and Peggy Lee, stuff like that, which I grew to love later in my life. But for me, I loved it. I don't know why. My father thought I was insane. And I would turn on every Saturday night. There was a live show. We lived about 130 miles from the city, in a very rural area. But I would get Spade Cooley, who was our West Coast Bob Wills. He played Western swing. Spade Cooley would be on Saturday night. Johnny Otis would be on Saturday Night Live, and Johnny Otis was R&B. band, and I just was taken with all of it. There was a lot of country shows on TV, live shows, Town Hall Party, Spade Cooley, a couple of other ones, and I used to watch Cal Worthington's Country Music Time, in high school, because they had a bluegrass band on there, which I ended up being a member of for about 6 months, which was amazing. So I loved it. I just had a real, something touched a nerve in me, and it was started with traditional folk and mountain music, and then went into bluegrass, and then all the way up until I got into the Byrds.
Well, they always say too that when you get older, you tend to circle back to the music of your youth, which would definitely play into Sweetheart of the Rodeo.
Yeah, I think so. I think when I went back to playing acoustic, it was about early 80s, and it was like I went back to square one, and I was working with another fellow, Al Perkins, as a duet, and we were playing festivals and various things. But I seriously went back to square one. I was playing mandolin again and acoustic guitar. Al was playing dobro. And that built into the Desert Rose Band, which was basically electric, but it was all still guys that had come out of bluegrass. And yeah.
What do you remember most about Graham Parsons? What sticks out the most?
Well, he was a lovely guy. He was a very charming man. I think the biggest problem for Graham, here's the thing, and I'll give you a quote that Dwight Yoakam told me once. I'm not too far back. Dwight and I are pretty good friends, and he says, with old Graham, he says, you can't be a country singer with a trust fund. I went, oh my God, that's brilliant. Graham had a trust fund. He was a very wealthy kid. He went to prep school. His parents bought him a club while he was in high school to perform in.
Wow.
And then he got into Harvard. He was there for like a week or something. He didn't really take that. And so he had that thing. But what really destroyed the poor man was all of those things that it didn't help him. It did not help him to go after that dream the same way everyone else does. Be you a writer or an actor or a singer.
Yeah.
You out there and you're starving and you're suffering and you have a passion, and that's what really sort of knocked him out of the thing. He had talent, Garrett, but he had just zero work ethic, not work ethic, but
like an urgency.
Yeah, and I must say, we wrote some great tunes together in the first Burrito album, and then I lost him on the second album, and eventually it was over. The Byrds, he came in a young kid, full of energy and ambition, and we needed that. We needed it. We were like old men in our early 20s. we needed this kid to push us and motivate us, and he did.
Yeah.
And he brought two great songs to the album. He brought Hickory Wind and 100 Years From Now. And that was the one Byrd album Roger and I didn't write anything on. We interpreted more. We took other songs that we liked and played them. But Graham, I don't think it was in the cards for him. I really don't. I think the worst thing that could have happened to him was how he was brought up and his background.
Yeah.
It did. It destroyed him. And he was 27 years old. And I got to the point where I loved the guy. I really had a close relationship with him up to a point, and then it became he was very selfish and was he was getting in the way of any kind of growth with the Burritos, which weren't going anywhere at that point.
Yeah.
I just couldn't work with him, and I fired him, and he got very upset. And I said, "I'm sorry, you don't really care about anybody but yourself." That was basically the dialogue, and I never stopped loving the guy. And off he went. And then when I met up with him years later, and I told him about Emmylou Harris and all that, that worked out somewhat for him and for her. My gosh, he did give her a lot of wonderful direction.
Yeah.
He gave her in country. Emmy didn't start out as a country singer. When I first heard Emmy, she was doing Joni Mitchell and Carolyn Hester and Judy Collins songs, more of a folk girl,
Well, what's interesting
Anyway.
is when you listen to Sweetheart of the Rodeo, like I was watching some of the songs last night, and what struck me was not only how timeless the songs are, but also how many memories of whatever just start getting conjured in your head as an audience member.
Yeah. It was a strange year, 1968. It was a very, very strange year. We had, I think, Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King both assassinated, and just things were very, not that they're any different now, but things were pretty crazy back then. And, we sort of took this literal right turn in a sense. I mean, here we go down to Nashville and do all that. But I think it is far more meaningful now. And the funny thing about Sweetheart of the Rodeo was it was the worst-selling Byrds album. It did not get good reviews. And then, of course, 5-10 years later, it's on the Rolling Stone Top 100 albums, and all of a sudden it starts getting all these accolades about how wonderful the record was. Who knew? But I'll tell you, the one thing it did do, it didn't make money initially. It did not get good reviews, but it opened the floodgates for country music. I was reading the funniest thing that I was going to, I don't know, somebody in Poco said, well, we were doing this before the Byrds. Well, they really weren't, because after Sweetheart of the Rodeo came out, a very short period of time before Graham and I got the Burritos going, and then there was Poco, there was Dillard and Clark, there was even Pure Prairie League even later, but all of it led up to the Eagles, who were initially, when they began, were doing what we were doing, but doing it tighter and better, and they figured out how to do it right, not shoot themselves in the foot.